Okay, hello YouTube. In this video, we're going to be asking the question, should we play the modern Benonie or should we delay? Anyways, if you like content like this and want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So I did a previous video on the modern Benonie where basically I said that the Taimanov variation after c5, d5, e6, knight c3 takes, d6, e4, g6, f4, bishop g7, and then hitting this king before it castles with the move bishop to b5 check was a very serious problem. And because of this, I recommended that black should simply play the Benonie from the King's Indian move order. And I'm going to talk about that more in this video. But more to the point, I want to ask this question again. Should we play the modern Benonie or should we delay? Because when I made that video, somebody commented that there were actually some Leela Chess Zero games that I didn't go over where black was okay. Like Leela Chess Zero actually drew with the black pieces in a computer competition. And I'll be honest, like when I was doing my research for this video, I only really researched the line knight fd7 a4 and then queen h4 check. I did do a brief survey of other moves in this position, but when I looked at the games, it looked like they were heavily lopsided in White's favor. The engine gave an initial assessment like, 0.8. 0.8. It was very good for White. And of course, the results were heavily skewed. I actually had to probably go like maybe two or three moves deeper from here in order to see the Leela game, which I was just unaware of when I made the video. And actually, a lot of the videos that I make, I base it a lot off of my own experience, my own the history of the game, the history of the openings that I'm familiar with, and then I'll go and I'll do an opening survey and I'll take a look at all the games that pop up on the database and I'll take a look at the general results. I'll take a look at the computer assessment. I'll double and triple check it. But because of the constraints of making YouTube videos, I have to like make a 10, 15-minute video. I cannot include every single variation, so a lot of stuff gets overlooked. And in this case, I shouldn't have overlooked this particular variation beginning with the move knight a6. This really is like the best move for black. And actually, this whole variation, of course, with knight fd7 is basically obligatory. You have to avoid the possibility of e5 if you're going to play the modern Benonie. So knight a6 is reasonable, and this was the path that the Leela Chess Zero game went down. This was a computer chess game. It was Chad 3.0 versus Leela Chess Zero, played on chess.com back in 2022. And I'm gonna admit, like, this game is way beyond my level. It's even just way beyond the level of even the engines that I use to analyze half the time. So because these engines are just they're really good, and I'm sure that these engines when they played the game they were playing on the absolute best hardware. So I'm not even gonna bother to computer check the computers. So knight a6 is what was played in that game, and then we have knight f3, knight b4, castles a6, and in the computer chess game bishop e2 was played. Now I've got a couple of human examples where this was played as well. I have a Vincent Kamar versus Richard Rapport played in Germany back in 2024, which continued bishop d7, f5. Now, just keep in mind, like when I put these positions on the engine, really the initial assessments that get spit out is typically major advantage white. But of course, that's not the whole story. Roughshed versus Leela Chess Zero. Leela Chess Zero managed to draw, and of course, in this Kamar versus Rapport game, Rapport managed to win with the black pieces. So there is a little bit here, and it is kind of an open question: is black okay here? Now, this variation, the game that was played in this human game, in my mind, is actually a little bit more scary than what happened in the computer chess game because there is this possibility that we could just get kind of rolled off the board. But that game continued castles and then bishop g5, and then we have f6. And when I did my initial research for the last video, I did look at this game, and then this is part of the reason that I just kind of dismissed this line because in the game, bishop f4 was played, and my computer spit out bishop h4 as best and just said major advantage white. But there actually isn't much of a difference between the two moves, as it turns out. Bishop h4 isn't nearly as good as it looks at first glance, and you have to run the engines a little bit longer to figure out that maybe this isn't everything it's cracked up to be. The engine spit out this variation queen e8, and then of course g4 is the most dangerous move, just fortifying all the pawns, and then b5. And this is just a good general rule in the Benonie, is if black manages to get in b5, usually black's okay. Like usually if black can get space on the queen side to compensate for whatever's going on, like with the weakness on d6 and with the space on the king side. Usually black has sufficient counterplay to survive. Um, so in this case, it would be something like bishop g3, targeting d6. We'd have to play queen e7 to protect, queen d2, and then b takes a4. And I'm just going to say that this position is unclear. The computer, of course, still gives, slight edge white, but it's a far cry from major advantage white, and of course black has plenty of counterplay on the queen side. If I could get this position, I would feel okay. I mean, this is fine. So this looks like it's reasonable, and of course in the game, what occurred was bishop f4, targeting that pawn immediately, and then we had g takes f5, queen d2, rook e8, rook a c1, pawn to c4, e takes f5, rook e1, knight e1, bishop takes f5. Was already apparently slight edge black. So this is definitely worth exploring, but I think it's important to look at, like, best play. What happens if white keeps all the pieces on the board? What happens with bishop e2? And of course, this is kind of one of the problems with this version of the Benonie where they play the Taimanov, is you tend to have all your pieces still on the board with black, which generally speaking isn't a good thing because it makes it more difficult to free your position. Now, of course, the one difference in this particular line versus the queen h4, queen e7 lines that I showed in the previous video is that we do have this knight on b4, which means that even though we have all four minor pieces, it's not like they're in a log jam on the back rank. We only have three back here. So we shouldn't be completely stuck. We should be able to get everything out. But of course, the computer assessment is still not great. It still says major advantage white. So we have this bishop e2, castles, bishop e3, knight to f6, knight d2. This was all played in the computer chess game, Rough Shad versus Leela Chess Zero. Rook b8, king h1, b5. So the all-important b5 happens. So we have ab5, ab5, and then we have bishop g1, and then we have c4. We have rook a7, and then we have knight a6. And this kind of gets to a point where after a bunch of these moves, I'm going to be completely honest, I really do not understand what's going on. Like, I don't think I could replicate this game, moving forward from here. I don't think I could replicate this game from either side. I don't think I could play the white pieces or the black pieces. The material imbalance is kind of insane. Like, black ends up being down like a pawn for the majority of the game, and in positions that I really don't understand. And then, but he still has enough to hold the draw when it's all said and done. So b3 happens, and then we have b4, knight on c to b1, c3, and then we have bishop takes a6. So this is like the sacrifice of a piece, but you can get the piece back on d2. But then after rook takes a6, black doesn't get that piece back. And again, like, this is chess beyond my ability. This is 3,486 rated chess, or in the case of Leela Chess Zero, 3,500 rated chess. Like, I don't understand this, but rook e8 is apparently what gets played. Queen f3, and do we take the knight now? Of course not. We play rook c8, and then we have rook c6, and I would have thought, maybe just rook takes c6 or pawn takes d2, but no, queen d7, and then we have rook c8, queen c8, rook c1, c2, and again, my mind is totally blown by all these ideas. Just the idea of putting your queen on c8, allowing it to get pinned, and then pushing the pawn to the c2 square. And the whole time, black is down a piece, and apparently black is okay. But this is Leela chess. But the fact that Leela can get away with it and that maybe it's okay is an indicator that obviously the modern Benonie is worth trying. Other than the Kmart versus Rapport game, it seems like the human results weren't that great, but that's still a high-level Grandmaster game played in 2024 that featured black doing very well in this modern Benonie. So this seems reasonable. So we have h3, and then we have c takes b1 equals queen, rook takes queen, but then we still have a queen, so queen a1, and so now we've reached this position where it looks like all other things are equal except black is down a pawn. So it should still be major advantage white, but of course Leela is a computer and not human, so it's able to somehow hold this position down a pawn by playing some very exact, very precise chess that, again, a lot of which is just beyond my comprehension. This would be a very rough position for me to play. against any human competitor. Just being down this full pawn right here. This is by no means an easy draw, but Leela, of course, achieves the draw, and once you get here and things have simplified a little bit, it's a little bit more clear that it's a draw, but it's still somewhat difficult. It's not so simple. Let's just put it that way. But anyway, so this ended in a draw here. This position should objectively be a draw, so that's a reasonable result. Of course, black is still down the pawn, and black played a game on this razor's edge for however many moves. Very, very difficult game. So when I'm building like a repertoire, the question I want to ask myself is, should I play the modern Benonie from the modern move order, which would mean that I would have to play this line against the Taimanov, because as far as I can tell, and actually until this other person pointed it out to me in the comments, I didn't even realize this was a possibility. But as far as I can tell, this is probably the only possibility. The other lines just aren't promising. You obviously can't block with the other pieces. You can't block with the bishop, and you can't block with the other knight. Knight fd7 is kind of forced, and of course, the queen h4 line I examined in the other video. The queen h4 line is kind of dead, so that pretty much leaves knight a6 as basically your only possibility to try here. So you're kind of stuck with this line. So this leads to an interesting question. Should we just play the King's Indian defense move order and then delay? And that's kind of a weird sort of repertoire question, because what you have to do is you actually have to compare two positions that seemingly have nothing to do with each other. You have to ask yourself about this position involving knight fd7, a4, knight a6, and you actually have to compare the assessment of this position to a position that is somewhat unrelated. Like you have to look at g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4 castles. And then the variation you have to look at isn't actually the direct transposition. It isn't f4 where d6 and c5 get played, because these obviously don't allow the Taimanov variation. It is the similar pawn structure where they have the four pawns and they're going to attack. But these assessments are so much better for black in terms of, if you look at this other variation, with the knight on fd7, and we have, a4, knight a6, the initial computer assessment is spitting out like at least 0.8 for white. This is major advantage white. And if we are hanging onto a draw, we're hanging onto a draw by a thread with absolute best play according to the best engines in the world. Uh, if we go back to this other move order, this isn't the case with pawn to f4. If pawn f4 and then we play d6 and c5, then everything is fine. Like the assessments are relatively close to equal. In some cases, slight edge black. Actually, the computer a lot of times will favor black in these positions because, of course, the king is castled. There is no bishop b5 check. So what you actually have to compare it to is the only line you have to worry about where the Benonie is questionable. So like you can in the King's Indian, you can play the Benonie against, for example, the Samish variation, and that's not considered questionable at all. You can play it against the four pawns attack, that's considered, pretty standard fare. You can play it against the fianchetto variation. So the only variation that it's really questionable against is knight f3. So if you really have it in your head that you want to play the Benonie, you have to ask yourself, is it more reasonable to play the Benonie against the classical than it is to just play the modern Benonie and get that knight a6, knight b4, that Leela Chess 0 game? So there's some ups and downs to this. So the short answer is it's unclear enough that you should be able to play the modern Benonie if you want to. The objective answer is maybe playing it from this move order is a little bit better, both in terms of absolute assessment and in terms of human results. I have a bunch of examples of Magnus Carlsen playing from this position with the black pieces, where he gets excellent results. I have a win against Ding Liren in St. Louis, played back in 2017. I've got another win against Vidit, played on chess.com back in 2023. So, c5, d5, e6, castles. Another possibility is knight d2. Knight d2 is following Ding Liren versus Magnus Carlsen. And that game continued rook e8, castles, knight a6, f3, knight c7, a4, knight back to a6, knight on b to d1, knight h5, bishop e3, e5, knight a3, f5, and Magnus Carlsen ended up with a good game, a complicated game, and he ended up going on to win against Ding Liren. So the other possibility was after e6 we could have castles. This is what happened in Vidit versus Magnus Carlsen, and then we have ed5, and then we have cd5. Now, what is interesting here from an absolute perspective, it might be better to actually play ed5 here. And that's an open question when you compare and contrast the two lines. Like ed5, the absolute computer assessment, something between like 0.6, 0.7 in favor of white. The pawn structure itself is completely symmetrical. I'm not down any material, and I will be able to develop all my pieces. So like bishop g4, like equality shouldn't be too far off. Like bishop g4, bishop g5, knight on b to d7, queen d2, rook e8, h3, bishop f3, bishop f3. We should be relatively close to equal here. And actually, I'm following a couple of games here. I'm following one game that I'm following is Kushavtev versus Wang Yu, played back in 2017. So this is actually pretty reasonable. Like, that game continued like Queen b6. Black got a reasonable position, and actually Black actually ended up going on to win. So when we compare kind of these two lines from an absolute perspective and from a classical perspective, I think we have to compare like the 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 computer assessments. Obviously, like one is like a little bit better than the other one. That if we play it from the King's Indian move order, it's a smidge better than the other one. But we also have to look at practical chances. Um, Most people right now, when we capture on d5, are recapturing with c capture d5. When I was doing my research, it seemed like most people were transposing into this Benonie. The computer assessments for transposing into the Benonie are a little bit better for Black than in the Taimanov variation. So the computer likes these positions for Black a little bit better than if Black were to play the mainline Taimanov, and the results reflect that. Black seems to do okay on the human level here. But the absolute best move would be something like e takes d5, and the computer assessments are close with the Taimanov variation. We've got like in the Taimanov variation, they're saying 0.8-ish. In this variation, it's like 0.7. So it's really just a question of which sort of poison would you prefer? Would you prefer to play this position that's symmetrical and should be fairly easy to understand and fairly easy to get to a draw? Or would you prefer to play sort of the position that I really don't understand? Like I have a very difficult time comprehending all of the ideas that took place after Bishop E2 in this Leela Chess Zero game, but maybe there's some advantage to that. Maybe this position is more dynamic. Maybe it leaves, in some sense, more winning chances. In my mind, it doesn't because it seemed like it was just every single move Black was just trying to survive. But I think both are reasonable. So to play the modern Benonie or delay, I guess the choice is up to you. My personal preference right now would be to delay, but I think my opinion could definitely change. It's already certainly changed a little bit. I didn't think the modern Benoni was very playable. Now I think it probably is at least playable. So I've already changed my opinion once. I'm liable to change my opinion again. Anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.